they don't talk about that, it's not necessarily popular, I guess. I mean, if there's like 5 people that go to, I don't know, like Douglas College or SFU or UBC, they speak about this, they post it. It's not much compared to, whereas if Beyonce were to post about the situation in Hong Kong or the situation with Uyghurs. So I think it also has to do with the fact that we don't get a lot of coverage through media and celebrities and politicians.
I think the contrast to climate change is a really interesting one. The thing with climate change and why it's so easy to stand up for is because there's nobody to hold accountable specifically. What you're holding accountable are plastic straws stuck in turtles' noses, are these faceless entities and corporations that are dumping garbage into the ocean that are killing polar bears with their bare hands. Not literally, but it's really easy to kind of be like, yes, I'm voicing the concern, and there's no specific person to target, so you're fighting the good fight, and there's nothing that they can really critique you for. However, when it comes to things like speaking up against the Chinese Communist Party, you are definitely pointing fingers, and you're pointing fingers at somebody that is very, very scary. And they can come for your career like you've experienced, they can come for your families like you've experienced, and so the stakes of that are super duper high. Another issue of the West is that it is so easy for us to, when we're critiquing the Chinese Communist Party and we're critiquing the authoritarian rule, for us to unfortunately devolve into racism. And I think it's a really important thing for us to draw the line between disliking and speaking up against the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government and the atrocities that they're committing, and not have that translate into fighting or attacking Chinese people in our community. Some of them may still support the Chinese Communist Party, but like Anastasia said, they've been brainwashed for their entire lives, they've been brainwashed for generations. What we need to do is start conversations. And unfortunately, it's much easier to be like, oh, you want to kill off her family. It's so much easier to just be like, yeah, your family, I'm gonna set them on fire. Like, obviously, that is not what they're thinking. What they're thinking is what they've been taught to think, and what they've been told is the right thing to think. And so it's a very fine line for us to tread here, and it does get a bit touchy, because again, you have your careers tied up into it, you have your finances tied up into it, and again, these conversations are so easy to just fall apart and be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go fight my Chinese neighbor out on the street in the back alley. We're gonna go at it, but that's really not the way to go.
Yeah, definitely, I think Western media, again, we talked about in the previous question about politicians, they're essentially, at the end, they're driven by money, they're driven by their readership. And, in previous cases that we've seen over the past few months, like NBA players speaking up about Hong Kong and stuff like that, immediately, a lot of Chinese, residing, whether in mainland China or, perhaps in even the US or Canada, they're like, oh, I'm gonna boycott NBA or something like that, and obviously their army is so big that, at the end it's still driven by money. And I think that's the controversial point for them, and that's why they're, Western media is afraid to report about it, and subsequently, people in the West have less chances of hearing about it. Obviously, in the past, Hong Kong has got a lot of media coverage, so in a sense we're lucky, but, stories like Shalina was sharing, they rarely get covered, and I really hope that they get more media coverage in the future.
The questions in a second. I'm sorry.
Another point I want to add, though, is a lot of Western media have offices in China, and this is something I learned at the beginning of my advocacy, is that, and at that time China was not widely talked about on the internet, and when, let's say, AP or New York Times want to write a story about China, sometimes their office in China would get threatened of closing down if they publish that story, and that is a significant setback for them. And then what will happen that will give them the freedom is that if a widespread of media all report on one story, then the Beijing government sort of don't know who to target, because you can't punish the mass. So that has been something that I oftentimes talk to several journalists at the same time, so that they would feel strength in number as well.
We see a lot of Chinese Canadian groups here in Canada, but they all are supportive of the Chinese Communist regime. Do you have any insights about why they continue to support this oppressive regime even though they're living in a free and democratic country? Culture groups.
Chinese culture groups?
They don't have
Well, like as a student myself, like I believe perhaps like you might know as well, like the CSSA, Chinese Students and Scholars Association, they have chapters all across North America, and say in the previous protests that we had, like supporting Hong Kong, for example, on August 17th and August 18th, we've seen cases where these associations, post on their social media saying that please come to the counter protests, sort of thing. They have, like, first off, like their members, like, which are, their target audience is generally like international students coming from mainland China. And I'm not definitely not targeting them as like a group, because I believe that they have like their own voices and they have their own beliefs. However, like they have been so affected by the sort of narrative strategies that they use in mainland China, that groups like this, like CSSA, can easily mobilize like huge masses to come and support their their narrative of, in supporting the Chinese Communist Party.
We're talking about student groups on campuses.
general Chinese Canadian culture groups.
Okay, that's a huge distinction to be made, because there are a lot of organic Chinese culture groups and there are a lot of communist-controlled culture groups that belong to part of the United Front organization. Do everyone know about United Front work? Which is an office that was established after 1989 Tiananmen massacre, and that the Chinese Communist Party tried to get overseas Chinese to all kowtow to their policy back home. Therefore, to have a united from outside, meaning that we're going to have these different culture groups, and especially on-campus student association groups. And when we look at them, they may look like a Chinese student group, but behind there, they're sponsored by the embassy. And sometimes they're quite open about it. Our ticket is sponsored by the Chinese embassy for you to go back to China if you won a lottery or like a lucky draw or something. And they're not as innocent as they look. And I don't want to promote any conspiracy theory, but this is so widely reported on the media, and that oftentimes they're being mobilized for a political purpose. And that, I think we should treat it with a lot more caution and speak up about it, instead of treating them like just natural, organic student organizations. And usually what they will do is, speakers like me that will go on campuses, and I have experienced this in the UK, and then of course they will get wind of it before, and they will call the Chinese embassy, and the embassy will call the university to cancel our speeches. And then the only way to combat that is you publicize it on the media like crazy. And then that they know that their ways are being exposed, yeah, they won't be as brazen.
Another thing with the community groups that I've kind of interacted with, that I've been to events for, is that, like a lot of you said, they also have family. They're still human beings. They have family back in China. And the stakes of them speaking up or them not being supportive is that, well, their families get hurt. Even if, like you said, there's the public and their private opinion. They might still be using their public opinion even when they're here, because they've been so conditioned to. And another thing is that to run these organizations, it costs money. Sometimes they're backed by the CCP, sometimes they're not. However, they are backed by business people that are in this community. And a lot of them are in the production of goods, or they still have business connections and ties to China. Obviously, products are cheap to produce there. It's easy, it's fast. I get it, it's convenience, or it's just kind of, it's been long established, and you speak the language, so it's a lot easier. So they still have these personal ties and these personal things at stake. So sometimes they just can't speak up. They feel that I'm getting the perks of the Chinese Communist Party, so if I get perks, so what? Like, who cares about you as long as I get mine? And so there is that kind of issue of, well, that's what they've always done, that's what they grew up doing, and they have businesses and they are still controlled.
Took the words right out of my mouth. I agree with everything you guys said.
Yeah, so for accessibilities, We're going to allow one question from the floor, just because I understand not everyone has Wi-Fi and able to get on Slido. So if you have a question, I see a hand right over in the corner. Thanks, Team AV.
It's okay, my voice is enough to. Okay, thank you. I just have one question. Why a lot of people, as a human rights activist, as a student from Hong Kongers and then Taiwanese, why a lot of Chinese people, they don't really, even the world, know about the Uyghurs? What do you think? Why people all over the world, even China, they don't really know about what has happened before Uyghur people and right now? Why they don't know? What do you think?
So the question is why the world is not informed about the atrocities that's happening in occupied East Turkestan of the
Yes.
Uyghur communities.
Well, I think it has to do with almost everything that we said here. Being with money, I think many politicians not being informed is very low at this point right now because it's been on the media a lot more than it used to, and like we said, money, and there's a sense of power that the Communist Party or the embassy is giving those people, so they're not able to speak on it. And when it comes to maybe like, I have a lot of people that I know at SFU, and I go to SFU as well. A lot of my friends, when I met them, a lot of them didn't know what Uyghurs were. Who we are, and they didn't know the situation that was going on. And the thing is, when I introduce myself, I don't say that I'm Uyghur because I know they're not gonna know who I am. So I have to say, have you heard of the concentration camps? Yeah, that's us. That's what we're going through. That's how I introduce myself. But I think the youth or people that aren't politicians don't know of the situation just because it's not, like I said, with the celebrities or with like people of power, they're not speaking about it more enough, and so they're not informed about it. And I don't really think that's their fault, but I do know that it has gotten a lot better than it was before, so that makes me hopeful. Because I know for a fact back in 2010, if I told people that I was Uyghur or I talked about a region in China, no one would know where I was. I even remember when I was back in elementary school when I told this girl I was Uyghur, and what she replied to me was, ogre? And I was like, no, Uyghur. And she's like, oh, I've never heard of that. And I'm like, it's okay, not a lot of people have either ways. But it makes me feel good to know that it's not like that anymore.
I mean, I don't think the CCP wants you to know who they are. And I think that's a really big part of why we don't hear about it. Like at the moment, they are still, occupied by China. What can come out of that region is very much controlled by China. If they don't want you to know about it, how are we gonna know about it? Like, they censor their internet. And if we don't know somebody from the community, there's really no way we can really get in contact or learn more about that region if they don't let you, if they don't release information. That's the big issue, is that the more information that they take in and they release, then the less control they have. And so in order to sustain this control, then they're obviously going to have as much of a blackout in the media, online, in the academic circles as much as they can.
Also, I think I just want to add that it's also because, we're Muslims, right? We're a Muslim ethnic group there, and China has brought up this idea that we're all terrorists and they're trying to teach us how to be civilians or whatever. And they use examples of some Uyghurs who have left East Turkestan and they went to Afghanistan to join the Taliban or even ISIS. But I feel like what the media has to understand is that the people in East Turkestan, the Uyghurs, they have no way of getting information from the outside world. So we see that ISIS is a group. Like, we know that ISIS is not, it's against human rights violations, we know that. But if you're in East Turkestan and you don't have any other news than what China gives you, and then you hear around your group people talking about, a free Muslim society where you can actually practice your religion, people don't know what they're going into. And you know, the reason why they escape because they think they're getting freedom. And I know so many people I lived in Turkey for about 2 years, and I've met a lot of people who've been to Syria and then they left because they were like, this is not what I thought it was. Because they were told different things because they don't have the information or the internet to learn what's actually going on.
I think misinformation is definitely a huge part here, because Chinese Communist Party has their own rhetorics about every single group. Now, if we look at all the persecuted groups in China, we see Christians. Well, everybody knows Christians in the West. You don't need further explanation on that. Tibetans, they have Dalai Lama and a lot of Hollywood celebrities who are willing to speak up, so you know a little bit about them. Now, for Uyghurs, that's a group that you sort of have to shuffle them into a geographical and also ideological box that is unfamiliar to the West. So is the Falun Gong. Does anyone in the West know, like a few years before, what a Qigong is? You sort of like, is it a religion, is it a way of life? And then Chinese Communist Party branded cult, terrorist. And then it's so easy for the Western media just to take on that rhetoric and just start from there and use, so we're basically using the term of debate that they set. And that is something to dive in and cut out from the root to understand these are all people who are being persecuted. And yeah.
Yeah, I think like all three of the panels here covered it really well, and also like to add on to Anastasia's point, like really like when like from the Hong Kong perspective, like when we hear about the Uyghur community, like we hear the words like Xinjiang and stuff like that, and these are vocabulary defined by, you know, the Chinese sort of regime. Like before this sort of movement, I never knew that, like, you know, actually Xinjiang was like kind of equivalent to like occupied East Turkestan. And now that I know, like then I can give it a new connotation, right? And we really have to, you know, when we learn about new vocabulary and so on, I believe that we really have to look into like what the historical and sort of social context this like vocabulary is given it.
But it's all CCP's hatred propaganda, and I wanted to ask you, like, isn't the same for Hong Kongers? Because now they're branding Hong Kongers as riots. And if you ask Chinese people who just came out from China, they're like, no, they are baotu, they're riots. We don't know what they're fighting for, and they don't care to learn about what they're fighting for. People in the West might know, some still don't. And like, yeah, it takes process to active learning.
Great discussion here today. I'm sorry we ran out of time for questions. I believe some of the panelists might be available afterwards. Anyways, we're wrapping up. Thank you all for being a great audience. Thank you for your amazing questions. Before we end today, before you pack up all of your things, I would like to introduce a special guest, the Lady Liberty Hong Kong team. They are a team of pro-democracy artists and professionals in Hong Kong. The Lady Liberty Project is an artistic means to voice, participate, and contribute to Hong Kong's pursuit of democracy under the shadow of autocratic governments through art, design, and public engagement. So the team has created a very iconic symbol of Lady Liberty Hong Kong, a symbol that symbolizes the unparalleled bravery of Hong Kongers voicing out their dissent during this prolonged anti-extradition bill movement. So I'm gonna invite our team Lady Liberty representative.